Good evening and welcome to another episode of BMA Violet Hour. My name is Tracy Beal. I'm the manager of public programs here at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And tonight we are commemorating the acquisition of 9 quilt blocks from the Monument Quilt. The Monument Quilt was a project that was produced by the collective called FORCE, Upsetting Rape Culture. Tonight we're going to hear from leaders and members of the collective, along with those who participated in making some of the quilt blocks. But first, I am going to introduce you to Shanti Flagg. Shanti Flagg is the Monument Quilt archivist. She's also the director of the studio, and she is a member of the collective.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tracy. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm so happy whenever people join us to talk about the quilt. So as Tracy said, during Force's active years, I was a collective member and I was the studio director. I joined Force in 2014 and my work was primarily Baltimore-based. I was teaching volunteers to sew to create the Monument Quilt, which is a collection of quilted stories from survivors of rape and abuse from around the US and internationally. I traveled with the quilt as part of our 50 public installations of the project. The intention of these installations was to create a public healing space for survivors of rape and abuse, invite the community to join in with integrating the idea that survivors are part of the community and that we should be able to talk about these issues publicly. Today, as Tracy said, I'm working with Fernandez and Hannah Brancato as an archivist for the Monument Quilt. So I'm finding permanent homes for these works of art to ensure their influence and healing power continue to reach people. So the Monument Quilt accepted submissions for 6 years. We were mostly focused on the US at the beginning, but the project expanded to become international with a particularly strong influence from Mexico City brought by one of our panelists today, Fernandez. The quilt culminated in a 3-day healing festival on the National Mall in DC in 2019, where we displayed over 3,000 stories from survivors to spell not alone in English and in Spanish. So today we're focused on keeping the power of the quilt alive by seeking caretaking individuals and institutions for each of our 750 plus quilt blocks. Each block has at least 4 stories on it, so that's why there's 3,000 stories and over 750 blocks. So these art pieces and their history and their presence start conversations, and they create change from the individual to the international level. It's hard to understand the Monument Quilt if you never saw it, so we've decided to play a video so that you can get a sense of the power of the project. Thank you so much for listening to my words, and I hope you enjoy the video. Thank you so much for watching that. I always love to see that. I miss the quilts. I miss the installations. Yeah, so I want to really thank the BMA for being a part of the archiving process of the Monument Quilt. I'm so happy that the quilt is going to be as a result of this acquisition by BMA, the quilt is going to continue to be displayed, especially in Baltimore, which was its birthplace. So thank you so much again for joining us tonight. I would like to introduce one of the project's founders, Hannah Brancato.
Thank you so much, Shanti. I share your feelings after watching that video. It just brings up all the people that have been involved over the years. And I'm really excited about the folks here tonight that represent just some of the quilt makers and organizers and activists and leaders that shaped this project. But yeah, I'm kind of having all the feelings right now. And this process of archiving the Monument Quilt has been amazing for that reason. And, we thank the BMA and invite those that want to support the effort to definitely get in touch. And so, yes, I am here to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Kalima Young, who has been a member of the leadership team throughout the duration of the Monument Quilt Project, and who is a friend and advisor that I've learned from since before the Monument Quilt or the leadership team existed, and who I continue to learn from today as that project wraps up. Dr. Kalima Young is assistant professor in the Department of Electronic Media and Film at Towson University. Her scholarship explores the impact of race and gender-based trauma on Black identity, media, and Black cultural production. And her new manuscript, Mediated Misogynoir, The Erasure of Black Women and Girls' Pain in the Public Imagination, is coming out this May. So thank you so much for moderating today, Kalima, and for everybody that's on the panel. I'm so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Hannah. And okay, I'm going to echo both of y'all. I'm all in my feels now watching that video. It really, really got me. So I have the pleasure of moderating a panel with three very, very important members, folks that have been involved in the Monument Quilt. The first person I would like to introduce is Dr. Joan Gaither, a native Baltimorean with a history of helping to integrate local schools and businesses during the civil rights movement. She's an artist, a teacher, an activist. She's created over 263 documentary story quilts since 2000 and continues to hold quilting workshops that encourage participants to research, capture, and visualize personal oral histories and memories. As a retired educator for Maryland State Public Schools and for MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art, Dr. Gaither passionately supports young people's voices by endowing the Dr. Joan M.E. Gaither Scholarship and Young People's Studio. Her documentary story quilts are included in personal collections and continue to be exhibited in local and national museums, galleries, schools, and churches. Thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Gaither.
Thank you.
All right. I also have the pleasure of speaking with Monica Stevens. Monica Stevens is a longtime activist in gender rights, trans rights, civil rights, and voters' rights movements in Baltimore and Maryland. That's a lot, girl. She is a 68-year-old Black woman of a transgender experience and the founder of Sisters of the T, an education, outreach, and advocacy organization in Baltimore that serves trans people of color who are seeking freedom from surviving sex work as their only means of support. Stevens is the co-founder of the Baltimore Transgender Alliance, a political action organization founded to help unify, strengthen, and empower trans organizations in Baltimore. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Monica.
Thank you so much, Kalima.
All right, and last but not least, I'd like to introduce you all to Maura Fernandez. Maura Fernandez is an activist, survivor, and consultant and advocate for survivors of sexual violence devoted to healing trauma and ending child sexual abuse. Co-leader of FORCE, she's also the founder and CEO of La Casa Mandarina AC, an independent Mexican organization devoted to ending sexual violence through artivism. For 22 years, Maura has worked nationally and internationally to create innovative and radical artists and advocacy projects to defend the rights of children, women, Indigenous people, and undocumented immigrants. So good to see you today, Maura.
Hi, Kalima.
All
Good to
right.
see everyone.
All right. So, just for the folks who are joining us through streaming online, just want to say that we're going to have a conversation with the panelists, and then we're going to open it up for a Q&A for the audience. So please feel free to drop your thoughts and your comments and questions in the chat so that we can come back to it and everyone can be engaged in what's going to be a fruitful conversation. So, welcome everybody. Let's get the party started. Um, so the first question I want to know, because I reckon other people want to know too, how did you become involved in the Monument Quilt? And I am going to start with Dr. Gaither.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. It was in 2010 that, as a documentary story quilter, quilting my own story, trying to make sure that voice could be heard, that I had an opportunity to teach. I've been working in the community, but to teach a workshop at MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art. And the participants at that time, Hannah Brancato was one of the participants who just took that, I guess, my teaching and mentoring to like another level completely. So in 2010, she was asked with a group of students in that workshop to create a quilt that was your voice, that told your story that only you could tell. And with that, I call it quilting from the soul. So that makes it possible and opens it up to everybody's story. It's your story. And that workshop was successful. It led to a course in the fall that was entitled Pathway to Awareness, Quilting for Social Justice. Hannah, in that course, then took what she'd learned in the summer, and she with her classmates took it into the community. She at that time was working with a women's shelter and asked them to participate. And one of the striking pieces in that exhibit was sex as a weapon that was done by the women and their voices. I mean, every piece in that exhibit had impact. And this one in particular was so very strong. And it's like, you will not deny these stories. So that's how I got involved. And Hannah just took it from the women's shelter to, before you know it, FORCE. And then with that, I was just so excited to participate and to see now, and thank the BMA for helping to just keep those stories alive.
Thank you. Thank you. So just having a space and using quilting as healing, and I hope we can circle back to exactly what that means for folks who might not have never ever engaged in the process and want to learn, like, what is it about the quilting process that creates such dialogue and creates open spaces for folks? Definitely. Monica, how did you get involved in the Monument Quilt?
This is interesting because it's starting to feel like Hannah was some central point of contact in all this. Somewhere around 2012 or 2013, my organization and those of us who were working in our organization were already doing some gender justice work and some healing justice work around sexual violence against transgender women, in particular transgender women of color. And we had already been doing some work with FORCE. And in 2014, a heartbreaking for me incident happened. There was a young transgender woman from North Carolina who was murdered. Name of Maya Henderson. I'll never forget this. And she was from North Carolina, from the same town as my mother. And her story ended up becoming one of these stories that was a cliche story. It also ended up being a story that wasn't true. And it was just a narrative that follows transgender women of color that had prostitution and drugs in it, that turned out not to be the story at all. She was related to a pro basketball player, and it turned out that the person who killed her thought that she had some money because she was related to a pro basketball. and it was heartbreaking. And so we were able to raise some money and to have a proper memorial for her and to invite her family.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, Hannah approached me, asked me, would we like to do a quote for her and for several other trans women who had unsolved murders, a couple of them that had been unsolved for as long as 10
Mm-hmm.
years, to
Wow.
be able to tell their stories,
Mm-hmm.
you
Wow.
know, because their stories weren't being told anywhere.
Right.
The stories were stories of horrible sexual violence, and and it was
Right.
the media would never tell the correct story.
Right.
I didn't hesitate to get involved and to have a chance to tell the proper story so that it could be. I felt like the only way that my spirit could be at peace and the only way their spirits could rest was
Mm-hmm.
to be able to put them on the quilts.
Right.
And so we put them on the quilts, and it also led, and I didn't think about this earlier, but it also led to some other healing justice work that I did, a project that I did called Love Letters to Our Bodies.
Mm-hmm.
This project at Force as well.
Yeah.
And it was about, me as a survivor and other survivors being able to try and make peace to us.
Right.
Because there were some things that I couldn't reconcile inside of myself.
Right.
I
Right.
wrote a love letter to myself.
So once again, I'm hearing this.
Some people.
I'm hearing this theme of sort of quilting as this opportunity to one, act as sort of a witnessing practice, and also
Yes,
to articulate healings and connections that you might not be aware of, right? The process
yes,
of making them. That's
yes.
really awesome.
And so this quote facilitated so much.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Facilitated so much, and it continues to.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
most definitely. Maura, would you like to tell us your origin story? We doing origin stories, it looked like. So how'd you get involved?
Um, well, I guess it started like way before, like in 2011. I just remember I was sexually abused when I was a child, and also was trafficked by my aunt while my parents were in Europe for trips for vacations. So I think I start like healing process, and at the moment I moved to New York because Mexico City is very progressive, but in that topic it's not. So there were very few nonprofits or like services like providers here. So I have the privilege of at that time for other things moving to New York, and I start like my healing process in a place where like have more services, and where there's trauma informed, a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2014, I was working with Lorena Corosias, that you also know, that she we were working a project for undocumented domestic violence survivors in Queens. And that's why she met Hannah and I'm also, and Rebecca, who's also the founder. And they invited me to co-organize the display in Queens. And at that time too, I was like in my healing process. I was doing better, like personally, and also my nonprofit. This like it's more like a grassroots organization based in the city. We were like going to another restructuring, going to a new phase. So I was just like collecting the best practices that I've seen in the U.S. on child sexual abuse or sexual violence. So so when Hannah and Rebecca and Shanti was there, they invited me. I was like, oh, this is very cool. And I was in Mexico at that time planning. And then when I went there at the display, I was like, wow. Because the Monument Quilt is more like an experience.
Yes.
That's the thing, because you can tell and tell and tell about it. That's why I like to show videos or more like quilts, because if you just say it, of course it's powerful, but it's an experience. It's a healing experience or whatever, because it depends of for me it was like 8 years, and like at the beginning was more like when I was there and I experienced that of feeling really not alone, that it was in my healing process, even that I was healing privately. So at the moment I was like, and that empowered me, like, to, I'm not alone. And that's when I say I want to take this to everywhere that I can. So like personally it became like more I put it in. Took it, sorry, to La Casa Mandarina, because I went to Anna and Rebecca and Shant, and I said, like, dude, this has to be international. No, I love the U.S., but people are so U.S. centered,
Right.
and it was fun, like, because at the beginning they were like, yes, it's cool, but I was like, no, and I just took it to different, like, internationally, of course, and also to Mexico City. Of course, it didn't have the impact that it had in the U.S. lack of resources. The originally was like, let's do it everywhere, because it was so powerful. And I, by myself, experienced when I just took it, that I will talk about it later, like when I took it to everywhere, it was just like, you could see like how people change, and just like having a few interactions, just like knowing about the Monument Quilt, seeing a video could change their lives.
Right.
Like, as it changed mine. So that's how I started.
It's so interesting hearing all of you talk about this, right? That the Monument Quilt is an experience, right? I tell you, from my involvement in the project, I became so much more able to articulate my experiences, right? That even though I've never made a quilt square, involved since day one, never made a square. I ain't quilting nothing. However, it's the
For
process.
now.
I'm like, I will make movies about it. But it's the process of being in that space, the process of witnessing, the process of hearing people articulate and seeing how people articulate experiences that are close to your own, right? It's just such a, anyway, it's an experience. So thank you, BMA, for grabbing part. So the next question I have, so what really, I feel like we've kind of talked about this though. So my next question was like, what really excited you about the project? And what was significant about it at the time that it came into your experience? Does that question? So what was significant about it when the time it came into your life?
For me, it is the opportunity to provide a safe space for anyone and everyone voice to be heard, to share your story. And what this particular FORCE project did in the Monument Quilt was that it invited just multiple people, and it became more of a healing piece in that process. But because there were such large numbers and involvement in the community, and is still having that impact, that I'm hoping that, the art and the quilts it's a process by which there can be a tremendous potential for an impact and changing attitudes, changing what's going on or what has gone on. So it's and that you can be able to just, this is my story, and if other people connect to it, that's even, I think, as powerful for that. So that's what, and when I found out that they wanted to do this multiple spread on the mall, it was all I could do to ask other folks and for myself to participate, to hear the voices, and to also let those voices know you're being heard. That you're being heard. So
Definitely. Anyone else, Monica or Maura, like what was its significance at the time that you became involved?
Yes, I'd like to go next. Dr. Gaither, invite is such a powerful and apropos word. One of the things that I noticed is the timing couldn't have been better. There just seemed to be, it just seemed to open the door for trans awareness. It, it could have been a coincidence, but I don't think it was a coincidence. Just, in my organization alone, there were just so many young trans people who just seemed to open up and to talk about their traumas and to talk about what happened to them. And they just seemed to gain courage and just that feeling of not being alone. And still feeling the impact today. I know that just in numbers for the community alone, in 2014, 2015, the numbers in one place, and since then they've multiplied tenfold.
Right. Right.
And they continue to multiply, and it even started to change policing in the city. The city is under a different kind of policing. It's slow, but it's happening. And so I look at the impact, and I think that we can't really measure the impact because I don't think that arrived at the end of the impact. I think that the impact is still continuing to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. It's like it's to me, it sounds like, you drop something in the water and you have all of these ripple effects. We
Yes.
never quite know how it's rippling through, right? We see little hints and little glints, but the
Yes.
process of it being there invites multiple levels of change in
Yes.
multiple ways that we might not even know, from a personal individual level to slow policy shifts or shifts in language, right? There's
Yes.
something about that process. Maura, what are
Yes.
your thoughts, hon?
Well, for me, well, personally, of course, is what I explained, but also in my organization, like in Mexico, there was not conversation at all. I'm not saying there was no people. Of course, there's always folks who came before us, of course, and I recognize it. But at the time, there was no conversation, and as I said, I was just restructuring my nonprofit, and it was great because FORCE was so diverse, and or at least we were trying to have all the voices included. That it's very complicated because we were a collective trying to not have everything was so innovative, and that's why it was so hard because there was nothing like the Monument Quilt. It's internationally. It's the first. It was the topic was nobody wants to talk about sexual violence, and also it was not only about talking about sexual violence. It's like changing the perception about what it is a victim, or like Monica was saying, like including the trans voices, or like of course, like a lot of voices were left.
Hold on for just 1 second. Is there anyone who can mute? Is that? Yay, Baltimore.
How did it unmute? That's me.
It should be right down at the bottom. There you go.
Yes.
Whoa.
That's a US.
Welcome. You're used to it, Maura. Go ahead, girl.
It's giving context to my
Been in
dramatic
Baltimore.
Latina. Yeah. So I think that it was so innovative and it was so radical. Like just the concept, the topic. Nobody wants to talk about sexual violence, and suddenly we were just bringing another. For the US, where like there was no language in Spanish. I have to translate, and there was not even the language as you were saying. So I think that also it was just building all the time as it was happening. As it was supposed to be 2 years, ended up being 6 years, and it happened in Trump's administration. So I think that the project per se was a reflection of the reality of survivors, of how all the things, obstacles that you are, and that maybe you make an advance in something, and but there's something, and then you are talking about survivors, and then the trans community comes and say and everything. You have to. I think that's the main. That's why I think that's what the significance, because I learned that you have to be evolving all the time, and being humble and learning from your mistakes. And
Yeah.
yes, and I think that because also was like we were like very few people, and as you say, Kalima, the impact was so. I facilitated a workshop where there were people from Zimbabwe, people that you don't know what happened there.
Right.
So I think that was the significance, and for my organization was just to start like having like what I say, like the progressive stuff. I don't know if progressive is the word, but like talking about trauma informed, talking about all the things that the monument could try to do about like shifting the perspective, like, you know, like help, like the three, like what we call whatever the three levels that it likes changing, helping or not helping, like giving reconnect survivors with their voice, like
Right.
also support the community and also change the policy, because you have to do it all. That's why the final display was so amazing, so complex, because, and that's why like it was the challenge, because you just can't just do one thing and just throw it. You have to try to be holistic, and that was a challenge. There were mistakes, but at the end, I think, well,
yeah,
it was great.
I got you. I got you.
You know, I just wanted to say that one of the, I guess, great potentials for this quilting and allowing people to have this voice is that it's something that you sort of begin with your own voice and hear your own voice, and you can use anything, and because it is your story, that impact will happen, and you start to work in your, it leads you to go from a small community to a bigger community to a bigger community. And now with the monuments, that impact that has on people, you know, just to get started. And the whole idea was to quilt social justice as a pathway to awareness that would make people move off of the mark. You know, we're aware of the yellow ribbons, you know, for protecting the soldiers. We are aware of the pink ribbon for saving the Tata. What happens to make you move beyond awareness to some form of action? And I think that's what this FORCE project and Monument Quilt, I mean, just blew up and continues to go.
It's interesting. What I'm hearing in here is, so there are just so many different layers. The way that we're talking about the way the project evolved sounds like a quilt. Do you know what I'm saying? The way they're talking about it went from like one square to another, and it rippled and it made these things. And then there's a thread that connects. You can see it. It's something about the power of making, perhaps, right? The power of addressing social issues first from a personal perspective, but seeing that all of our personal stories resonate with other people, and it makes it larger and larger. Was there something, some of the deepest community organizing around the project occurred in Baltimore City and in Mexico City. So can you all sort of discuss the impact specific to those locales? If you can think about Baltimore and its impact and the impact of it in Mexico City. Yeah.
Well, if you want, I can start, and then, because I'm with Mexico City.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that it was in Mexico City, like, as I said, maybe the monument wasn't as big as our famous in Mexico City because of the lack of resources. But I think that the way that the monument quilt impacted Mexico City particularly, and it was not only Mexico City, because as I said, I was just like facilitating workshops, quilt making workshops, and lectures about child sexual abuse. And I talk about the monument quilt in like 50 workshops or something in different countries. And I collected quilts from Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, Thailand, so Palestine. So it was more like, it was not just Mexico City as all, but the work that we were doing, the places where La Casa Mandarina like had an impact. And I think that it was more like the impact was through the monument quilt, what the La Casa Mandarina got from the monument quilt and influence our work. So I think that basically what I always like, it's like the slogan that we have now that took it from the monument quilt, that it's we believe you, it's not your fault, and you're not alone. And that's what we did it all the time. And there were like, it was just a campaign that FORCE had, and what that means, you know, how like making survivors publicly supported instead of shame. So I think it was more about the concept and the work, the advocacy, because
Mhm.
just like having a lecture, when we have a small display on the psychiatric hospital for children,
Mhm.
like talking about it, and the language that I use, just saying rape or this or shifting, or all the vocabulary and the radical ideas of not of stopping victim blaming and shifting the narrow narrative. I think
Mhm.
that was the impact. And
Gotcha.
even sometimes, for example, and it's like in places like in Palestine, I was just speaking in English and they were translating to the other folks in Arabic, you know, and
Mhm.
and also like in different communities. So it was very interesting just to kind of use some words that even for myself speaking out loud was weird at the beginning. And
Right.
also like in the undocumented immigrants, because also Lorena Corosios, as I said, she was working with undocumented Latinos. So it also brought like all the conversation about what it is a Latinx being in the US.
Mhm.
We put Latinos in a box and just like also talking about immigration in different ways. And
Mhm.
I think also the impact of the Monument Quilt is just bringing this intersectionality. It's just
Mm.
not talking about sexual violence. So it was more complex because it was just not talking about, oh, don't
Right.
rape or rape is this. It's just like, well, let's talk about class and race and so it became complicated because my work even itself, it was just like when I just started about it, it was just like people here, as I said, because the conversation was not there.
Uh-huh.
I started the conversation in this level when not like in a I don't want to brag about like, oh, we're of course there were people again say they in this, but the time is like I was having like a lecture about sexual violence, but talking about intersectionality and race and
So,
it was very interesting. So that was the impact, that instead of starting here because of all of this influence of the Monument Quilt, we
right.
started 20 years as you were, you know. So but that's also, it was amazing, but it's also the challenge.
Mhm.
That was It was also hard to get funding because people was not there, so they were not
Right.
getting it. Now they're getting it. Now that we're in Me Too era, now that Me Too is here, now everybody's talking about it.
Right.
But when you start, Pioneer has a me and the other folks who started it's a prize. So but it's good now. It's just like we were talking about it this about 10 years ago, so thank you.
Right.
I think
Right.
just to finish, sorry, that if the monument could happen here, will have a different impact.
Right.
So it would be more widely known. So I think that in too many years it would be recognized in the future as the way that we recognize the AIDS quilt.
Mhm.
It will be recognized at one of the shifting
Mhm.
policy and public
Right.
perception of sexual violence.
I
Sorry.
got you. No, I got you.
You
Don't
know,
apologize. You got that. I'm
yeah.
with you. So it's like this idea that so we started a very complex there was a very complex conversation, and slowly folks caught up to the complex conversation and the complexities of it to some extent, right? That we have a shifting language that has occurred and has been steadily occurring as the project was going on actively, and continues to evolve and evolve and evolve in terms of our understanding of sexual violence, our understanding of advocacy, our understanding of how one narrative does not fit all. It is not just one story that we can understand
Right.
the lenses through. Monica or Dr. Gaither, what are your thoughts in terms of like direct impact on the local? Any
Well, I
thoughts
think,
crossing your mind?
well, for the workshops and things that I've done, I start with the community, someone in the community. And I think that it should not be lost in the conversation.
Mhm.
The key sort of the linchpins or the key persons in those communities that have the connections to and the wherewithal and the trust of the people in the community. So in Baltimore, Hannah and the force right there, on North Avenue,
Right.
had a place where the community could come in and the folks there could go out in the community itself.
Right.
So, and to make them feel comfortable to do that. And hopefully, it's I think Hannah, just her vision. It's about having someone with a vision and the wherewithal, once share their story, to encourage others and make it possible for them to be able to do that. And and for the BMA to acquire some of these quilt squares, really then sometimes might change the conversation in terms of, but in terms of, I get not just the impact of it, but I think it can add to the impact and to an audience that possibly would not even know about some of these voices that are being heard. So I think that that's really important there.
Right. Awesome. Do you have any thoughts, Monica?
I do. And so I guess I'm trying to like find a way to kind of make it into a bite-sized chunk.
It's hard.
Yes, it is hard. But before 2015, transgender women couldn't be raped because the law didn't recognize us as people who could be raped. And the way I look at it is this. I can't say that the Monument Quilt directly changed the law, but my vision sees this. So when I'm looking at the video and I'm seeing people who are engaging with the quilt and I see their reactions and I see the movement that it has in people and how it shifts people and how it shakes people and how the shift takes place. I know that it was part of the shift.
Gotcha.
Because I was raped at 17 and it wasn't recognized.
Right.
Because, back then they said you weren't born in a female body, you can't be raped. And the law just refused to recognize it.
Right.
And because, the quilt was such an integral part of this movement and this shift, it's kind of like a tidal wave that was coming along.
Right.
And as that tidal wave came along, the change had to happen. And so that was the year that we were finally able to go to Annapolis and finally get the law changed.
Yes.
And so for some of us, it was the year that we finally were able to get the law changed and we were able to finally feel like whole people.
Wow.
Because there was something missing. I mean, and something that left us feeling really vulnerable and in danger all the time. Not that we're not still facing some danger, but that led people to be able to do sexual violence with impunity.
Right. Right.
With some real impunity. And so for me, the quote is just like, well, that took one of your licenses away.
It's just like, no, you can't do that. We're going to have a space where it's acknowledged because those stories are out there, right?
Yes.
Because the stories and people's experiences are out there that shift the narrative and shift the sort of language and frameworks that we use around sexual violence. Who's rapeable? What is a rape narrative? And what is a survivor? And what is a victim survivor, right?
Exactly.
Creating these sort of broad, it goes back to Dr. Gaither's, it's an invitation, right?
Yes.
And I think that is what I'm hearing in all of your reflections is that by having this invitation to engage, we make a broader and intersectional and more impactful sort of framework with which to deal with something that happens to everyone, everywhere, regardless.
Yes,
Right?
and when you see the impact in people, when you see people sitting with the quilt, when you see people embracing each other, when you see people break down, the human connection is made.
Yeah. I always think about the National Mall experience and being there and sort of being involved on that National Mall. And just there's this one image that comes into my mind is a woman was getting off of a subway. She was getting off a subway, going about business, didn't know that we were displaying anywhere around there. And she saw that a part of one of the quilt squares, she stopped and saw it. She saw that a part of a quilt was sort of pushed over, like the wind moved it, and
Mhm.
she very gently laid it back
Mm.
out. She wasn't a part of the crew, she wasn't a volunteer, but her understanding the impact of this thing and the
Mhm.
amount of care that she took into someone else's stories that wasn't even hers. And then
Yeah.
she kept on
Mhm.
about her business, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, I also think what you were saying that one of the Monument Quilt main things, it was like brought hope. You know,
Yes.
it
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's gonna fix everything, but at least it gave hope
Mhm.
and did it in with grace. I don't know, because it was not like this drama soap opera thing. It
Right.
was with dignity. So I
Right.
think that that
Mhm.
was the main thing. That's also that's a shift of all the things that surround sexual violence. Just like
Mhm.
think that we like survivors are human beings, and
Right.
that there's hope and
Right.
there's healing. That's another slogan of them.
It's interesting, I think very powerful, even in the way that the Monument Quilt was set up, so that there were these pathways for
Mhm.
people to follow, to have their awareness just open up.
Right.
And then you could see people just really breaking down
Mhm.
um, for this. So I would like to offer or suggest that as we are, and I'm always thinking about aging, who's going to be left to pick up this mantle and keep it going until these stories, it's like I use pins a lot in
Mhm.
my own work to signify that lingering pain
Right.
from different incidences or whatever has happened, to be able to just move beyond that and have some young folks, thank you, Maura, to, it's like to just take up the banner and move it to multiple places. This serves as a model for what
Mhm.
can be done and
Mhm.
given the laws should be done to shift the thinking and the narrative.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
sorry, Kalima. That's why it's great that the BMA like got
Mhm.
Thank you.
some quills.
Yeah.
This is a way of keeping it alive. The
Yes.
small, like a small display. Sorry,
Yes.
Kalima. And
Oh
it's
no, no. Do not apologize.
I
We're
know.
just all on
I'm
the same
sorry.
page. We're entering the
No.
mind meld, and since we're entering the mind meld, I'm going to have to stop for a second and say we're about to open it up for Q&A.
Oh,
Because we have some folks who have been joining us in this conversation and want to be engaged in the conversation. So one of the things I want to sort of open up the stage to think about. So the Monument Quilt, part of it is going to the BMA. It is being archived by institutions all around the country and all around the world. So, how can an institution like this brick and mortar space foster public interaction and engagement with the quilt? So, I'd love as panelists if you have thoughts and suggestions, and then I'd want to open it up to folks who have joined us in the community, and invite us to have sort of a Q&A and open conversation about how can the institution foster public interaction with this project. Anybody got thoughts? I know everybody's going to pull out their list of things, right?
just providing an opportunity and a space where people can come in and do this creative work in a safe space. That's
Yes.
how FORCE started with the
Mhm.
Monument Quilt. So, and museums are, really, I think could be central. Many of them have work public spaces where they could work and have folks to do so,
Mhm.
whether it's in person or not, do it virtually, but
Mhm.
to continue this conversation at multiple points in time.
Gotcha. Anybody else? Just thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's really anything I could add to that.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm looking at a question that we have in the chat. The question is, why did Force decide to archive the quilt? and why through museum acquisitions? Who would like to speak to that?
It's like, why not? Right now, I find that we are constantly being asked, a people of color, of women, whatever, to document whatever your legacy is. And because many of our ancestors were not able to document that, it wasn't allowed by law or it was destroyed.
Right.
We depend more and more on the information and making sure that it's correct. So why not archive it so people can know?
Right, right. Why not archive it? What as
Yes.
a so seeing the museum as a place where people will actually be able to interact with it more regularly,
Yes.
right?
Also, well, first it's because, as you were saying, Dr. John and Monica, it was like an amazing project that should be still there, and we should archive it. But we also honor the stories and the quills. We just can't leave them like rotten in the storage. So that's why the archiving is like we're trying to rehome it. And it's not only, of course, that we're seeking like institutions or people who value the role of art in social justice, who are dedicated to anti-racism, anti-racist, sorry, anti-oppressive practices, and who value artwork created by the people of all genders who are survivors of sexual and intimate partner violence. So some people want their quilt back. Some, of course, that we don't want to just focus on museums. It would be great because museums are public spaces, but we are also open to institutions who want to caretake a part of history, her story. So it's
Right.
more about it. Yes, Joe.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think that we live in a time that sort of puts a lot of emphasis on the end product, and that by archiving it, it makes you aware of and makes whole the process, the thinking, what really went into it as
Right.
a final. And that's how you also then engage the public in creating their own stories and having their voices heard, and to know that it's not just this end product, it's what went on to get to that has an
Right.
impact.
Right. I think sometimes people get a little freaked out about the idea of archiving as if that means like it's over. And
Oh,
archiving just means that you're caretaking. I wish
yes.
the phrase were different. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't think it actually holds what archiving is. It's like it means you're stewarding it, you're shepherding, you're making sure it's not getting destroyed by moisture. Like it's a living,
Yes.
breathing thing that you create space for
Yes.
folks to access. So I think that's why museums and churches and people's personal collections, all of the different ways that the quilt squares are going back into the world or
Yes.
coming into the world are going into the hands of folks who can actually shepherd it.
Right.
Right.
Also, it's online, Kalima, as you know, Dr. Kalima. It's
You knew me before the doctor part. Go ahead.
Yes, that's why I was part. I was in that process, so that's why I want to call you Dr. So yes, but that's also like at the webpage we're updating it all the time, so you know where the quilts are, because we're trying to send them back to, for example, to the people from Zimbabwe, the people, so they can also.
Right.
It's like this, as you were saying before, Monica, that it's like a human problem or situation, so that we're connected, and also you can go and see the app and see the quilts online. So that's also part of the archiving, that you can go and see them or every quilt in our app. Well, so yes.
Okay, there's one. Go ahead.
I think also on the simplest level, museums are awfully good caretakers.
Yes.
If they're in a museum, 100 years from now, somebody will be able to see the quilts.
Right.
Speak
Yes.
on it, right? Better than my backyard, I tell you what. I think, do we have space for one more question? There is a question in here, but hold on a sec. All right, but we're closing shortly, so I don't know if folks can speak to it really quickly. But one of the questions is, how do you think the impact of the Monument Quilt will expand or grow in the future as more and more survivors engage with it? I know that's a big one to leave on, but hey, welcome.
As long as you got people to do the work, it'll keep going. And as long as there's stories to be told.
Gotcha. Anyone else? Any last thoughts on that question?
Yeah.
Well, the quilt, it's a living
Yes.
being, a living being.
Yes.
And it's alive in all the people who participated, who engage with it. So even while we're speaking, it's still spreading. And that's what we're trying to find. The archiving is that, Kalima. We're trying to find the most, like the online, the local people, through storytelling, through all the ways that we can just expand that, so people can experience what we experience. That it's that we are not alone.
Thank you. Thank you. Monica, any last thoughts, my dear?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I think the first question kind of answered this question because we don't know who in the future may come in contact with the quilt and how it will impact them.
Exactly. You just
Almost
don't
an
know how it's going to ripple.
unanswerable question. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What the next ripple is and how far the ripple will go and how wide and how deep and how everything. And that's the beauty.
That's the beauty.
It's too organic.
Yes.
So as we close on, I just want to let folks who have joined us understand that the BMA is in the process of documenting and cataloging the quilt. So as soon as they're done documenting and cataloging and making sure that they have everything together, then it will be able to be on display. But right now, it's still in acquisitions going through its process. So I just want to thank you all for coming and participating in this panel. Thank you, Dr. Gaither. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Maura. It was just a pleasure talking with all of you. And I am going to hand this off to Tracy at the BMA to sign us off.
Oh, I'm here with everybody. Okay, good.
What's up?
I didn't see the screen change. My goodness. Anyway, thank all of you so much. I would just want to say thank you to each and every one of you that have participated in this panel. I also want to say thank you to Hannah and Shanti. One thing we did not speak to early on is that they co-produced this program with us. The BMA did not do this on our own. We could not do this on our own. So thank you so much for being such an integral part of that. Dr. Kalima Young, you did an amazing job moderating. Dr. Gaither, Monica, Maura, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you so much for being so candid and so honest and so truthful. I know a lot of folks had questions about when they're going to be able to see the quilt blocks. And Camilla, you also spoke to the fact that we are still cataloging and doing all that good stuff. But also, too, I think one thing to consider is that that FORCE has been extremely just flexible and very wise in bringing the quilt blocks to us, or allowing us to acquire the quilt blocks. And they're being very flexible in what the display or the exhibiting of the quilt blocks looks like, because this is also an archival process as well. So it can take very many shapes. So we're looking forward to the future of that. And yeah, so that lastly, we definitely want to make sure that anyone who is interested in learning more about the Monument Quilt, that they go to the monumentquilt.org, where they can learn more information about the organization. So once again, thank you all, and thank everyone for tuning in, and until next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.